واتقوا الله لعلكم ترحمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم ولا نساء من نساء عسى أن يكن خيرا منهم ولا تلمزوا أنفسكم ولا تنابزوا بالألقاب بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعض الظن إثم ولا تجسسوا ولا يغتب بعضكم بعضا أيحب أحدكم أن يأكل لحم أخيه ميتا فكرهتموه واتقوا الله إن الله تواب رحيم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Brothers and sisters, Sheikh Mahdi, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before anything, we'd like to send our sincerest condolences to the Imam of our time, Sahib al-Asri wa zaman, Al-Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. on the martyrdom of his grandfather, Aba Abdullah al-Hussein. We'd like to welcome you all to the 6th night of our English program here at the Ashura project as we commemorate the tragedy of Imam Hussain, alayhi salam. Tonight we remember the companions of Aba Abdullah, the ones that answered the call, the ones that gave up everything and went against the world to stand by and die with their Imam. It's narrated from Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam that on the night before my father was martyred, he told all of his companions that they are released from any obligation towards him and that they were free to leave if they chose to. One by one, the companions of the Imam stood up and declared that they would never leave his side. He then told them, if you stay here, none of you will survive and you will all be killed. To which they replied, all praise is due to Allah, who has honored us with martyrdom at your side. After that, it's narrated that the Imam told them, raise your heads and observe. As these men looked up, they saw their places and homes in paradise, while the Imam himself was calling out to individuals and pointing to their houses and levels in paradise. Let us reflect on these fascinating characters tonight. Characters like Burayr ibn Khudayr, like the freedman John, like Habib ibn Mudahir, Zuhair ibn al-Qayn, Abis ibn Abi Shabib, and every companion who chose death over leaving their Imam. Every year we say, Ya laytana kunna ma'ak, fanafuza fawzan azima. If only we had been with you, we would have achieved a great victory. But let us all look within and ask ourselves, and I ask myself first, do my actions throughout the year reflect Ya laytani kuntu ma'ak, or does it show otherwise? Because the true companions of the Imam are in action like they are in name. Insha'Allah, we can all take advantage this Muharram of the countless lessons these companions taught us and hopefully be the Ansar for our living Imam, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam. Let us all raise our hands in dua together. Allahumma arifni nafsak, فإنك إن لم تعرفني نفسك لم أعرف رسولك. Allahumma arifni rasulak, فإنك إن لم تعرفني رسولك لم أعرف حجتك. اللهم عرفني حجتك فإنك إن لم تعرفني حجتك ضللت عن ديني. And with that, please help me welcome Samahat al-Sheikh Mahdi Rastani after a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صل على محمد وآل محمد عجل فرجه. One more loud salawat, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يدركه ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا أقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ذلك ومن يعظم حرمات الله فهو خير له عند ربه وأحلت لكم الأنعام إلا ما يتلى عليكم فاجتنبوا الرجس من الأوثان واجتنبوا قول الزور صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli. Last night we began our discussion on the topic of music, and we explained first and foremost the crucialness and the significance and the importance of delving into this topic. We said that at the first level, this is a topic that we deal with in a very common way. Wherever you turn and wherever you go in today's world, music is part and parcel of our lives, whether you want it that way or you don't want it that way, voluntarily or involuntarily. At the second level, this is a topic that is extremely complex and nuanced. There's not one type of music today, though that might have been the case hundreds or maybe 1,000 years ago. Today, for every single emotion that the human being experiences, you will find some sort or form of music that invokes that emotion within the human being. At the third level, the reality is that the issue of music has always remained vague for most of us. Meaning that most of the time, if you were to engage in a discussion with someone around this topic, the answer to the question of what music is halal and what music is haram would vary very heavily from person to person. In fact, the conversation would not end in 5 to 10 minutes. Typically, it might take an hour or two to figure out what the ruling on this topic is. Every person you go to will have a different ruling on what type of music is halal and what type of music is haram. And at the fourth level, we mentioned that this is an important topic for us because it fundamentally correlates with the two camps that we find in the plains of Karbala. In the plains of Karbala, you have the camp of Yazid, the Yazidi lifestyle represented by his army. And then you have the Hussaini lifestyle represented by his camp. And if you were to look in the lifestyle of the likes of Yazid, you would find that music plays a prominent role, along with some other elements, other haram forms of entertainment, gambling, alcohol, so on and so forth. So much so that some of the companions of the Prophet themselves raised objection to Yazid that you can no longer be the Khalifa of the Prophet when you are engaged in listening to this haram music all the time. Therefore, from these four angles, we said it is important for us to delve into this topic, specifically because it helps us understand other areas of Islamic law and Islamic theology as well. We said if we wanted to delve into this topic, it's important for us not to guess and assume that simply because I don't feel a negative effect on my life when I listen to this type of music, that therefore it's not a problem and it's not a big deal in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One needs to kneel in front of Quran and Ahl Bayt to learn what they believe in. The reality is there are many things that don't seem like big deals to us, and yet in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are very big deals. And there are things that in our eyes seem like very big deals, but in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may not necessarily be so significant. One has to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for He can speak on His own behalf. He has sent this Quran to us to communicate with us. Hence, instead of guessing and assuming, we have to go to the door of the Quran and Ahl Bayt to understand what their ruling is on this issue. We said if you do that, you find that Islam has a deeper problem with music than simply the type of lyrics that this music is accompanied by. Yes, if it is the type of music that comes with lyrics that promote violence, that have sexual references, that have references on drugs and alcohol and substance abuse, this is clearly a problematic type of music. There's no doubt about this. Nonetheless, we said there is a deeper problem that Islam also has with the issue of music, and that is that some types of music have an effect referred to as the concept of lahu, meaning the type of distracting that it can make you forget about your akhirah and make you less likely to worry about where you are headed. One said, or one might say, that this is an extreme understanding of music and its role, to which we responded of examples of the real power and impact that music carries with it. We said music is that thing that can essentially change things around you or make you feel like things have changed around you, when in reality none of them have changed around you. When in reality none of them have changed around you. It can push you to an extent where you take the life of another human being in cold blood, as it is done with soldiers at times, and so on and so forth. Last night, this is where we brought our discussion to an end. Tonight, inshallah, we will continue with this discussion by posing the following questions. Number one, where does the Quran speak of the concept of lahu, and where do the narrations speak of this foundational issue that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has with certain types of music by the name of lahu? Where does it occur in other verses of the Quran and in hadith? Number two, are there verses of the Quran that specifically address the issue of haram music or not? Number three, how does the ruling that Islam has on the issue of music demonstrate for us how this religion has been legislated in such a manner that it can be adopted in different times and in different eras? Number four, is it true that the type of music only is haram, that I feel like when I listen to it, it has a negative effect on me? And that if I listen to a piece of music and it didn't negatively affect me, or at least I couldn't tell if it was negatively affecting me, then this music is halal. Is this assessment a fair assessment, or is the ruling of our scholars different from this common misconception? Number five, what is the ruling on musical instruments? Can I engage with musical instruments? And is it true that the narrations categorically negate the permissibility of engaging with musical instruments? Number six, what if I fundamentally have a doubt about whether a piece of music has a lahwi impact on me or not? And number seven, and finally, which companion of the sixth Imam was it who had a friend and a neighbor who was essentially written off by the religious people of his time because he engaged in listening to music and in haram relationships and partying and so on and so forth, but eventually ended up in heaven because of the wise words of our beloved sixth Imam? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. When you look at the concept of lahu in the verses of the Quran and in the narrations, you find that the Quran refers to this concept very often. Because the reality is the lahwi effect is not done and doesn't happen only through music. There's other things that potentially can have this impact as well. In fact, someone can live a life of lahu as well. Sometimes you see people, they're well into their 50s, well into their 60s, well into their 70s, they're well established in life, but this person's life is a lahwi life. He's still running around looking for his new toy, for the next shiny toy in his life. This life, the Quran refers to it as what? As a life of lahwa and la'ib. Therefore, the Quran refers to the concept of lahwa very frequently. And when you go to our narrations, you find that the Ahl Bayt also spoke about the issue and the concept of lahu as well. You find in this narration, this hadith Qudsi, where the Imam is quoting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, "O human being, وَأَكْثِرْ ذِكْرَ الْمَوْتِ, and remember death. Remember the moments where you're going to be taken from this world and held accountable for your deeds. وَمُفَارَقَةُ الْأَهْلِينَ, and the time where your friends and your relatives, they can't solve your problems anymore. Your connections, your relationships, they don't hold that weight and value anymore." Then the narration continues and he says, وَلَا تَلْهُ, don't engage in lahwa. فَإِنَّ اللَّهْوَ يُفْسِدُ صَاحِبَهُ, because when you engage in lahwa, it corrupts the human being. Why? We said lahu is one of those evils that the fact that it is evil is not so clear in and of itself. But it is evil because it opens the door to hundreds or thousands of other evils that can come your way. Because if I live a life where I am distracted from the akhirah, well, guess what happens? Anything that is going to be a problem for me in the akhirah, I'm going to forget about now. It's not going to be a big deal anymore. How many times in the verses of the Quran do we read that if you want to end up in the right place on the day of judgment, you have to remember you're headed that way? In fact, when you look into the verses of the Quran, the people who show up on that day and have done a good job with their deeds, when their book of deeds is given to them and they call everyone Ha'u muqra'u kitabiyah, what do they say immediately after that? They say, Inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiyah. You know why I ended up here? You know why my book of deeds is shining like this? He's so proud, he's calling other people to come and take a look. Ha'u muqra'u means everyone come and take a look. You know, you've seen sometimes people get a degree. Alhamdulillah, they're proud, they're happy. They might go online, they might share it on their social media, say, Alhamdulillah, I worked so hard for this. Alhamdulillah, I finally was able to get my degree. This person who's now going to make it into heaven, take that happiness times 1,000 or 1,000,000, whatever you want to call it. He says, come and take a look at my book of deeds. But why did you end up here? How come the other one didn't end up here? Because inni dhanantu anni mulaqin hisabiyah. Because I had yaqeen that this day was going to come. I was sure. I was looking forward to it. I knew this day was going to happen. So because I knew it was going to happen, I was preparing for it my whole life. Now imagine the person who's living a life of lahwa. Well, this person, he's not looking towards his akhirah. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can come and tell him, oh, dress like this, pray, fast, all of this. He's not even looking in that direction. So it doesn't even matter anymore. Hence the issue of lahu is something that is very important for Quran and Hadith. And it occurs in multiple verses of Quran and multiple narrations of ours as well. So then the question comes to mind, okay, if this is the problem that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has with music, are there verses of the Quran that address the topic of music in particular? Are there verses of the Quran that say, listen, when you come across at least some sorts of music, you have to pump the brakes, you can't engage with it, you can't listen to it? Yes, there are at least 5 verses of the Quran that scholars have taken to have been referring to the topic of music. Yes, if you were to Google in the verses of the Quran, where is the topic of al-musiqa, nothing is going to pop up. But there are titles under which the topic and the issue of music would fall. And hence, when the Quran talks about that title, music that falls under that title is also part of that ruling as well. And of these verses is the verse that we started our lecture with yesterday from Surah Luqman, Surah number 31, verses 6 and 7. The Quran says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, and from people there are this subgroup. مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ, they go around building a bazaar, building a market, they go around building a sales for what? They sell lahwa al-hadith, the type of speech that is lahwi. To do what? لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, to misguide people from the right path. بِغَيْرَ عِلْمٍ وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا, and when he comes to the faith, he takes it lightly, he makes fun of it. The Quran ends with this, and I'm mentioning this because we're going to come back to this point at the very end of tonight's lecture. أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ, there is a painful punishment for this person. وَإِذَا تُتْلَى عَلَيْهِ آيَاتُنَا وَلَّا مُسْتَكْبِرًا, this guy who's producing this type of speech, when we come to him and we read the verses of the Quran and we do inzar to him, walla mustakbira, he's arrogant, he walks away. كَأَنَّ فِي أُذُنَيْهِ وَقْرًا. It's as if he can't even hear, as if someone has covered his ears. He doesn't care. فَبَشِّرْهُ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Give him the glad tidings of a severe and a painful punishment. So what's the sha'n and nuzul of this verse of the Quran? Pay attention. We're going to connect this to the topic of music. When you come to this verse of the Quran, and the Quran says, Lahu al-hadith, the type of speech that is lahwi, it is distracting. Normally, if it was just us in the verse, we would say maybe certain types of music fall under this category, yes? Except there's no room for guessing, because multiple narrations of Ahlul Bayt say when the Quran says Lahu al-hadith, he means the ghina, he means the music and the singing that people do. Imam al-Baqir, other Imams are narrated as well. The moment they used to come to Lahu al-Hadith, the Imam himself, sometimes we try to make the application of the verse. We say, Lahwi Hadith, maybe certain types of music fall under this category. No, that's not what's happening here. What's happening is an infallible person is telling you immediately when the Quran says Lahu al-Hadith, some types of music definitely fall under this category. This is the application of the Imam himself. And this is narrated by other companions of the Prophet as well. Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, all of them say, we remember the Prophet used to speak about this, that when he spoke about Lahu al-Hadith, he used to speak about what? Al-Ghina, the type of singing and music that falls under this category. So now you look into the sha'n and nuzul of this verse of the Quran. What type of people or what group of people is the Quran referring to when he says وَمِنَ النَّاسِ? There's a subgroup of people, they do such things. Yes, this is what the Quran is saying. Who are these subgroup of people who do this? You look into the sha'n and nuzul, and one of those sha'n and nuzuls that scholars mention is an individual by the name of Nadhr ibn Harith. Who was Nadhr? Nadhr was a merchant. Okay, nothing wrong with that. He used to do business, he used to go between Arabia and where the Persians had their territory. Nothing wrong with that either. Yes, being a businessman is recommended within our school of thought and in our religion. But what was the problem with Nadhr ibn Harith? Nadhr ibn Harith, for certain reasons, had this jealousy towards the Prophet. He wanted to work against the Prophet. So as part of his propaganda machine, what did he used to do? When he traveled to the lands of the Persians, he would hear from them the mythical and fictional stories of fictional characters in Persian literature. You might say, well, what is he going to do with that anyways? Who cares about that anyways? What Nadhr used to do is he used to come back with rhythm, with poetry, with different tools. He used to tell the stories of these mythical, fictional creatures and characters, so that when the Prophet speaks of the stories of the previous prophets and the previous aqwam, people aren't so interested anymore. He used to call people, come to me. Muhammad speaks to you of Aad and Thamud, but don't worry about him. I'll tell you about Rustam and Sfandiyar and this one and this mythical character and this fictional character. Come, entertainment. What was his point? His point was, come, get involved in this kind of stuff. Get involved in this kind of stuff. Then when the Prophet comes and tells you, oh, Aad, this happened, Thamud, this happened, you say, listen, we've already heard a juicier story. We don't need to hear this one. The Quran says about Nadhr, is a very important point. The Quran says about Nadhr what? أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ فَبَشِّرْهُ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Verse 6, verse 7. Now I ask you, if the Quran is referring to Nadhr ibn Harith, who was taking these stories and coming and telling people, and the Quran says punishment, I'm not happy with this is a problem, this is forbidden. Now I ask you, did Nadhr ibn Harith have technology of the 21st century behind him when he was producing his stories? Did he have the greatest technological progress that the human being has ever witnessed behind him when he was telling his stories? No. His attempt was a very basic, petty, failing attempt actually. And yet the Quran says there's punishments worthy of punishments. So now I ask you, in a world where thousands, millions of dollars, sometimes billions are spent in an industry to hold your attention and to grab your attention, and the music is fine-tuned to the greatest extent with the greatest technology that the human being has ever experienced, do you think the Quran would look at that and say, yeah, no problem, it's not a big deal, go ahead? This guy, now I call him this poor guy, but in reality he's worthy of what the Quran is telling him. This poor guy was doing what? Some stories. And the Quran says, no, that type of entertainment is not allowed. It's going to distract people. What do you think the Quran would have said if the Quran was being revealed at this time? Where billions of dollars are spent, that one track of music, there's 50 takes, 60 takes, 100 takes sometimes to get it just right. Get it just right for what? For your attention, for your time, for your bucks, for your dollars. You think the Quran would have looked at this and said, oh, no problem, it's not a big deal, go ahead. If the Quran has a problem with Nadr ibn Harith, the Quran definitely would have had a problem with some of the music that we hear today. This is the first verse of the Quran that we come across, but this is not the only verse. Then you come across other verses of the Quran where the Quran starts to speak about the concept of false speech. Recite a salawat, please. The Quran in multiple verses speaks about this idea of qawl az-zur, false speech, empty speech. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاجْتَنِبُوا الرِّجْسَ مِنَ الْأَوْثَانِ, stay away from the idols, don't worship them. وَاجْتَنِبُوا قَوْلَ الزُّورِ, and stay away from false speech. Before you can move around and say, well, Shaykh, we don't know, is this really talking about music or not? The Imam himself says, هُوَ الْغِنَى. The narration himself comes and says, this is ghina he's talking about. So it's not even a matter of, well, maybe this, maybe that. No, it's this singing and this music. So the Imam does this application for us. We're not even doing this application. Sometimes we're the one who does the application. Maybe in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, you need to be kind to your parents. Okay, so how exactly am I supposed to be kind? Quran and Hadith may not necessarily go into too much detail. They'll left it up to you to think, what does it mean for you to honor your parents? For some of us, it means, checking up on them or visiting them or being kind to them. For someone else, maybe he's wealthy enough, for him it means buying a house for them, for example, whatever the case might be, yes? So then sometimes you have a doubt, would this fall under that category or not? Because you're doing the application. When it comes to false speech, the Imam is doing the application. He's saying, listen, you don't even have to sweat this. Let me just get it done for you. Qawl az-zur, false speech, that is the singing that they do. That is the music that they produce. And qawl az-zur is mentioned multiple times in the verses of the Quran. And then you also have, and this is the fifth verse, you also have the title of al-laghwa. And that also, you find scholars have understood to refer to the topic and the issue of the singing and music. So clearly Islam has a problem with some forms of singing and music that are lahwi, because the verse of the Quran said what? Lahu al-hadith, yes? The lahwi type of speech. We said lahwi means the type that makes you less likely to worry about your akhirah, distracted, less likely to think about your duties as a Muslim. Where am I headed? Let me get my affairs in the proper organized manner. I might leave this world anytime. When you're listening to music, typically you're not thinking about any of these things. If it's lahwi music, you're definitely not thinking about these things. So I say, okay, Sheikh, I got you 100%. Okay, lahwi music is a problem. Yes, you tell these brothers. Now these brothers that I know, they're going to say, Sheikh, I got it. So let me go listen to all the music that's out there. I will report back with the ones that are lahwi, so none of us listen to them. You said the ones that are lahwi, yes? You said the ones that have a negative impact on you, it makes you less likely to worry about the akhirah, think about the akhirah. less likely to pray, more likely to look at something you're not supposed to look at, to listen to something you're not supposed to listen to. This is what you said, yes? Okay, Sheikh, I got you. Let me go and listen, and then we'll figure out which ones of them have a negative effect on me, which one of them doesn't. And this, brothers and sisters, is not the criteria to the ruling of our scholars. This is not Islam's ruling. This is typically how people understand the topic of music, is that they will tell you, yes, the music that has a negative effect on you, it's a problem. If it doesn't have a negative effect on you, it's okay. That's what they'll tell you. It's a personal experience. It's subjective, depending on who's listening to the music. But the rulings of the scholars is not this at all. Because like this, everything will fall apart. How are you supposed to know if it's going to have a negative effect on you until after you listen to it and the effect is already on you? So this is a delicate point. So the ruling of the Maraji', mainly Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, and some of the other scholars as well, is this. They say, listen, go and look within society. The type of music that typically people consider to be Lahawi. That's a problem. Ayatollah Sistani, I listened to this music, I had no effect on me whatsoever. He says, great, it might still be haram for you. Wait a second, it had no negative effect on me. He says, that's not the ruling. The ruling is, does society look at this music and consider it to be the type of music that people typically listen to for Lahawi purposes? That is the ruling. You want to get a little bit more practical, so it helps a little bit more, simplify things a little bit more, bring a little bit more clarity to the discussion. The likes of Ayatollah Khamenei and a group of other scholars, they will say, you know what, if you want to become even more practical, listen, it's that type of music that they use in places where people go for lahwa, where people go for haram gatherings. It's that type of music that typically people play in clubs, in parties, in discos, and these haram places. And with this, brothers and sisters, the ruling of our faith on music should be a very simple thing to figure out. Anytime you have a discussion on the topic of music, and the discussion just on the ruling, the fiqh aspect of it, goes beyond 5 minutes, you're probably doing something wrong. You probably misunderstood the topic. The ruling is very simple. It's not meant to be vague. Not every time you come across a type of music do you have time to discuss with your classmate, your colleague, for 2.5 hours if this music is halal or not. It's not the way Islam was built. You're not expected to stand in the middle of Kroger for 2 hours and say, oh, well, what do you think about this? Can we listen to this one? I don't know. Well, let me grab this tomato sauce, but I have a different opinion about this one. That's not the way it was meant to be. The ruling is very simple. You ask yourself in the first 2 seconds, is this the type that they would normally play in those gatherings or no? Mainstream music that you find today, and I hate to break it to you, the top stars, typically it's going to apply to them. Yes, that's going to be a problem. Typically that's going to be an issue. It should take you a couple seconds to be able to answer this question. Therefore, this ruling, brothers and sisters, is not based on, okay, let me see how I feel after listening to it. No, that's not the ruling. The ruling is typically, is this played in those areas or not? Now, when we come to this part of the discussion, there's always one brother who comes after the lecture and acts super righteous. Sheikh puts his head down. Sheikh, you said the type of music is haram that they play in these gatherings. He barely put his head up, yeah? Sheikh, I've never been to any of these gatherings. I have no idea. Son, what is a party? What is this? I've never come across any of these things. Okay, mashallah, wonderful brother. He doesn't even know what these things are. Wink. So to this person, first of all, he says, well, I have never been to these places, Aslan. I have never even crossed by this place. Sheikh, someone as pure as me, how am I supposed to know what type of music they play in these places? Okay. To this person, we have 2 answers, yes? The first answer to this person is, listen, first of all, nice try. Secondly, you might say, I have a doubt. Well, wonderful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a particular ruling for those moments when you have a doubt. At the end of the day, it's only 3 situations you ever come across. Either you know this music is not played in those gatherings. Okay, wonderful. If you want to listen to it, go ahead. Or you know this is a place where people, they use it in those gatherings. It's definitely haram for you. Yes? Or it's a situation where you're doubtful. Now let's just say you are that righteous individual who's never passed by such gatherings, okay? I'll take it, no problem. I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, okay? But if you have a doubt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a ruling for that situation. This whole process shouldn't take more than 5 seconds. Either you know one way or the other, or you're doubtful. So what's the ruling if I'm doubtful? The ruling if you're doubtful is that it is technically allowed for you to listen. But this is one of those areas it's good for you to take precaution. You remember when it came to the halal meat, you were going crazy? And we said you never take precaution in any other area? Bismillah. You say, Sheikh, I want to take precaution. Bismillah, this is one of those places, it's good for you to take precaution. Music is a slippery slope. You should take precaution. Why should we take so much precaution when it comes to it? We'll come back to this in just a second. First, a couple more points. If you pay attention to how the ruling is placed, how the ruling has been legislated, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I'm going to give you this principle. The type of music that they play in these gatherings, don't listen to them. But you know what happens when this is the ruling? Naturally, as time passes by, these gatherings also evolve. The type of music they play in them also evolves and changes. Don't make the mistake of assuming that God's ruling is changing. What is changing? The application of the ruling is changing. Makes a world of difference between these two. How many times have I been in a gathering, someone comes up to me, Sheikh, please tell these maraja, these scholars, they keep changing their ruling. When I was a kid, this music was a problem. Now they say it's okay. Yes, Habibi, because when you were a kid, 20, 30, 40 years ago, whatever the case might be, they used to play these things in haram gatherings. Nowadays, you put that on, people think you're weird. So it's not a problem to listen to it. So they don't use it for lahwi purposes anymore. It doesn't play that role anymore. Take a look at classical music. Classical music back in the day, in the Victorian era, in these palaces and these, gatherings, so on and so forth. This is what people used to do. They used to drink, they used to dance, they used to mix with each other. That's what it was for. Today, if you listen to classical music and put it in some party, everyone's going to walk out of the party and say, what is this? Hence, you find this fluidity in the application of the ruling of Islam. Not in the ruling itself. The ruling isn't changing every day. The ruling is legislated in such a way that when you apply it at different times, it would apply differently at different times. And that brings us to the next topic, and that is the topic of musical instruments. Another loud salawat, please. One might ask, well, what about musical instruments? These musical instruments, I've heard that the narration says this is the work of shaitan. When you go back, you find there were musical instruments earlier even before the time of the Prophet. The def is one of the famous ones. Sometimes you might see in movies that depict the time of the Prophet or earlier, you will find the def, for example. You will find the mizmar, and you will find other musical instruments as well. When you look at the narrations, you find very harsh tone in the narrations. Almost as though the narrations are telling you categorically, engaging with musical instruments is a problem. This is almost the understanding you walk away with. But the likes of Ayatollah Sistani, Ayatollah Khamenei, and other scholars look at these same narrations and they say, yes, the reason why these narrations are so harsh against musical instruments is because at that time, these musical instruments almost had no halal usage to them at all. If you were buying a musical instrument back in the day, there was no such thing as, I'm just going to use this to play classical music. What classical music? If you were going to buy a piano, things were very different a couple hundred years ago. But now today, these musical instruments, the overwhelming majority of them have dual usages. You can use this piano to be part of something greater and potentially turn it into haram music, or you can use the piano to play something that's not haram. It's not lahwi. They don't use it in parties in this place and that place. Potentially, you can do both with it. Yes, if you ever came across an instrument that is predominantly used only to produce haram music, then yes, engaging with that musical instrument is going to be haram, but it's going to be very difficult for you to come across a musical instrument like that today. The violin, yes, 300, 400 years ago, maybe was used mainly for haram gatherings. In today's world, one might argue it's used most of the time for halal music. Or at the least, there's dual usages. Now, this process that we just did, brothers and sisters, we just took a ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and said, yes, this applied to the time of the Prophet for this particular reason. This process I just did is extremely dangerous. It's like surgery. If you don't know what you're doing, you can ruin your faith. Imagine if I walked in here today, they said, Sheikh, please, why don't you lead us in salat? I say, okay, wonderful. We're going to pray Maghrib, it's 1.5 rak'ats. And then Isha is going to be 2.5 rak'ats. And everyone's staring like, what on earth is he talking about? Say, Sheikh, Maghrib is 3, Isha is 4. I say, yes, but this was during the time of the Prophet. Times have changed. Sheikh, did you fast today? Yes, I fasted until 12 p.m. Sheikh, Maghrib is 8:30. Yes, but that was for the time of the Prophet. You can't just pick up anything and say, oh, this was for the context of the time of the Prophet. You have to be an expert. You have to look at the wording of the narration. You have to look at the wording of the verse. It's a very delicate process. It's like surgery. You know, if you have someone do surgery who doesn't know what he's doing, instead of fixing the problem, he will cut your vein. It's over. You never want Sheikh Mahdi doing surgery for you. You'll be dead before you know it. You have to be an expert. This is a delicate process. Can't just pick up any ruling and say, yes. People do this because it makes them sound very smart, very intellectual, very progressive. Yes, I remember watching a TED Talk once. The lady who was presenting, from the moment she started, yes, hijab used to be practiced like this during the time of the Prophet. Now times have changed, so hijab has changed as well. That's not proof. You need proof that this ruling is exclusively for that time. This is a very delicate process. You need to be an expert. If you're not an expert, Bismillah, go ahead and become an expert. No one's stopping you. Sometimes people say, oh, why do I have to listen to this? You don't have to listen to anybody. Go become an expert yourself. You don't want to become an expert? Great. Now you have to listen to an expert. It's one or the other. So we said, if you come across this type of music, as I'm wrapping up, if you come across this type of music and you don't know, is it played in those gatherings or not? We said technically you can listen to it, but this is one of those places that I would recommend taking precaution. Why? This brings us to the final couple points that we want to make. Because, brothers and sisters, you find Islam in general has kept its distance with music. Islam is not a religion that encourages the involvement of music in our day-to-day life. That's not Islam. Islam in general says, listen, just keep your distance. I'm not saying every type of music is haram. I'm not saying this is this is that. But generally, keep your distance. You know where you can tell this from? One of the most beautiful things about Islam is that you will never come across a religious ritual where music was legislated as part of that ritual. You see this, for example, with the adhan. In other faiths and other religions, quite often there will be some other musical instrument that is tied to some form of religious ritual. It's time for prayer, we're going to ring this bell. We're going to blow into this horn, something that was practiced back in the day, into this trumpet, for example. Islam came into the picture. Islam said, no. Don't tie that to any of my rituals. We're going to keep some distance from this. It is a very slippery slope. This is one of those areas. It is good for you to take precaution. So what are we going to use for this adhan? You can use beautiful rhythm. There's nothing wrong with it. The narrations, we will talk about it more tomorrow. They tell us to recite Quran beautifully. When you're giving adhan, you recite beautifully, but use the natural voice. Keep some distance from music. Why? Because all music is haram? No, because we want to take some precaution. We want to keep some distance. And the reason why Islam has taken this distance is because when you look at music and listening to it, the reality is the narrations tell us that this is not just a sin, it is a major sin. When a scholar wants to figure out what is a major sin, what does he do? There's a number of discussions on this topic. How do you tell if something is a saghira or a kabira? Does it have a practical difference? It absolutely has a practical difference. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa said, verse 31, if you stay away from the kabair, I will forgive the saghair. This is why this discussion is so important. So how am I supposed to tell if this is kabira or saghira? One of the criteria that they mention is look in the wording of those narrations and the verses of the Quran. Did the Quran and Hadith just say don't do it? Or did they say don't do it, and if you do it, there's punishment for it? If it's the latter one, this means that this is a kabira sin. This is a major sin. Now I ask you, when in Surah Luqman, verse 6 and 7, Surah number 31, we were reading, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَنْ يَشْتَرِي لَهْوَ الْحَدِيثِ لِيُضِلَّ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ وَيَتَّخِذَهَا هُزُوًا. Didn't the Quran say, أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ مُهِينٌ? The Quran said what? Said the one who produces this music, he will have a humiliating punishment. And then you find in the narrations of Imam al-Baqir and other Imams, they came and said, stay away from ghina, فَإِنَّهُ مِمَّا وَعَدَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ النَّارِ. Because it's one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you have to deal with the punishment of hellfire if you engage in it. Islam's stance is very firm on this issue. Now you say, well, Shaykh, it's very difficult. I fall short. Sometimes it sounds really good. Listen, I understand. Nobody said it was easy. And nobody said we'll never fall short. Why do you think you're dealing with Arhamur Rahimeen? You're dealing with Arhamur Rahimeen because you and I fall short. Don't worry, I'm in that group and I'm in that camp too. Now you might struggle with this issue, maybe I struggle with another issue. Every one of us struggles with a different issue. But instead of bringing the faith down to where we are, we have to learn to elevate ourselves up to where the faith wants us to be. Instead of sitting there and say, oh, don't worry about it, it's not a big deal. Say, no, my Lord has told me this is a big deal. If I fall short, I will take responsibility for it. And guess what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is waiting and sitting there for you to take responsibility for it and forgive you. So why are you so worried? Why are you so hesitant? And hence you find in our narrations, there were people, everyone else who might have seen this person would write them off. Say, yeah, this guy, he's never going to change his lifestyle. He's been like this. He's always going to be like this. And amongst them was one of the friends and neighbors of a famous companion of Imam al-Sadiq by the name of Abu Basir. Abu Basir narrates the story for us. This is from Al-Kafi. Abu Basir says, I had a neighbor. This neighbor of mine was close with the Sultan. It means he was close with the government of the time. Because of that, asaba malan, he was doing very well. He was doing work for the government, for the Sultan at that time, and the Sultan was paying him very well. Because of this wealth that he had found, he was setting up his own live concerts and parties and so on and so forth. And as part of this, of course, he had bought a number of mughanniyat, a number of people who would come and sing for him. And you know, back in the day, nothing was recorded, everything was done live. This is how it was. Abu Basir says, me being the neighbor, of course your house is right beside the house of this person. He said, it started to bother me. I'm not a person who's into this kind of stuff. This neighbor of mine also didn't used to be in this kind of stuff, but now he is. And now he's continuously, every day I pass by his house, one party, one gathering, this, that. He said multiple times I thought about it, but I didn't know what to do about it. He said, one day I went and I knocked on his door. I said, listen, I'm your neighbor. You didn't used to be like this. But now I see you're engaging in these parties and so on and so forth. Don't you want to change your ways? He looked at me, he said, Ya Aba Basir, Ana rajulun mubtala. I have my own issues. I'm struggling. I don't know what to do. Wa anta rajulun mu'afa. You're doing fine. Religiously, you're on the right path. But don't look at me, I'm struggling. He said, but I do have one request from you, Abu Basir. What's your request? He said, listen, I've heard you listen to this person by the name of Ja'far ibn Muhammad. When you go and you see him this time, tell him about my situation. Maybe he can help me. Maybe he can do something for me. Abu Basir said, sure. That's the least I can do for you. Abu Basir says, I visited the Imam. It seems as though this was in Medina. The Imam said, listen, when you leave and you go back to Kufa, pull this friend of yours aside and tell him that Ja'far ibn Muhammad says the following. Firstly, he sends his salams. This is a sinner. And the first thing the Imam did was what? Tell him I'm sending my salam to him. My respect, my kindness, my compassion. He said, send him my salam first of all. Second of all, tell him just this one line. It's a very short line. دع ما أنت عليه. Leave what you're doing. وأنا أذمن لك على الله الجنة. Stop this practicing that you're involved in, these practices, these parties, so on and so forth. And you know what? I will guarantee for you heaven. Abu Basir says, I went back. When I went back, people came to visit me. People came, neighbors, friends, relatives, so on and so forth. They came to visit me. He says, I waited until everyone left. When everyone left, this guy walked in, my neighbor walked in. فَاحْتَبَسْتُهُ. I told him, wait, I have to tell you something. You stay. حَتَّى خَلَى مَنْزِلِي. My house was empty, everyone had left. I pulled him aside. I said, listen, you remember you told me to tell Ja'far ibn Muhammad about you? He said, yes. Did you tell him? He said, yes, and I want to tell you what he said. He said, send him my salam and tell him to leave these things and I will guarantee for him heaven. And Abu Basir says, my neighbor could not believe it. He said, Allah, Allah, قال هذا جعفر, Ja'far ibn Muhammad, he addressed me, he sent his salam to me. Abu Basir said, yes, this is the promise he gave you. This guy couldn't believe it. A sinner. Fully engaged in sin. The narration says, Abu Basir said, I said this one line, I carried on with life. He says a number of days passed. A number of days passed, I saw all of a sudden my neighbors knocking on the door. I came behind the door, I looked, I saw he doesn't look like the way he used to look with the fancy clothing and the luxurious clothing and all the stuff that he had gotten from the wealth, from the Sultan. So I cracked the door open and he was hiding behind the door because even his clothing was not the best of clothing. He was ashamed of his clothing. I looked at him, I said, you're my neighbor. He said, yes. I said, why in this position? In this situation? He said, listen, after you said that to me, I dropped a lot of things. And the wealth that I had, I gave it away as charity. And because I had sinned so much, I went a little bit further. I even gave away some of the clothing that I had myself. I'm coming to you because I need a little bit of food and I need a little bit of clothing. Abu Basir says, I went into the house. I asked some of my other friends. We put together some food for him, some clothing for him. He says, I gave it to him. He went back. A number of days passed by. He got sick. We came to visit him. The physician said, no, there's no hope for him. He's leaving. He says, فَغُشْيَ عَلَيْهِ. He was fainting and coming back. فَغُشْيَ عَلَيْهِ. He was fainting and he was coming back. Abu Basir says, in those final moments, before he took his last breath, he turned to me. He said, Ya Abu Basir, قَدْ وَفَى لَنَا صَاحِبُكَ. That thing that Ja'far ibn Muhammad said is happening. He closed his eyes and he didn't breathe anymore. Abu Basir says, I was shook by this. He says, time passed, we buried him, time passed, I went for Hajj. I went to the house where Imam al-Sadiq was staying. He says, and this is the wording of the narration, he says, the moment I put my foot into the house, before my second foot could come into the house, I heard a call from inside the house. And Imam al-Sadiq, he said, Ya Abu Basir, قَدْ وَفَيْنَا لِصَاحِبِكَ. We held up our promise for your friend. Yes, I might be a sinner who other people have completely written off. But the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so much greater. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we walk in the footsteps of those who even until the end of their life, the last moment of their life, they were engaged in sin. But they had one moment of awakening and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took their hands. And like this friend of Abu Basir, they ended up in heaven. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll continue with this topic and we'll talk more about how the narrations talk about the concept of music. With that, inshallah, we'll bring tonight's talk to an end. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Thank you, Sheikh Mahdi, for that thought-provoking lecture. We'd like to once again ask for the community's help to build a better future for our youth by supporting the renovation project of the Taha Foundation Community Center. If you would like to donate, there are specific donation boxes next to the tables when you first walk in. If you would like to help and contribute financially towards specifically Ashura-related activities and future work, there are also donation boxes for that on the entrances and exits, or please see one of the organizing brothers or sisters. Also, one of our volunteers found money left on the floor here last night, so please see one of the organizing brothers or sisters if you notice that you're missing anything. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. And now, I'd like to once again ask you all to close your eyes, open your hearts, and embark on a short journey with me to the sacred land of Karbala with a short poem titled We the Ansar, written by my dear brother Nuri Sardar. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. We the Ansar from near and far came to his aid. He stood alone as Yazid's sword upon him prayed. We the Ansar from near and far came to his aid. He stood alone as Yazid's sword upon him prayed. Dare they touch him when our souls by his feet we laid. His death is death, and life began when him we praised. All our souls cried when with our eyes on him we gazed. If they touch him, the heavens scream, the earth is swayed. The son of the Kaaba and of Muhammad is worth our children crying and our bloodshed. On our bodies we'll build a throne for his reign and be killed 1,000 times, all for Hussein. We came running when a lone cry had reached our ears. Alone he stood, in his heart grief, in his eyes tears. He cried out, not knowing if any soul hears. Is there any to help me, as death on me peers? We told Yazid, take our bodies, our heads on spears. We told death to delay his death and take our years. We told the swords to upon our bodies pray, and for our beloved threw our lives away. And when killed, we cried out again and again, and be killed 1,000 times, all for Hussein. We saw his blood was worth more than the greatest gold, and all riches are outweighed by Hussein's household. The care of his daughters into our wings we fold, and their right to water with our swords we uphold. For something greater than gold our bodies we sold. The greatness of Hussein's love sleeps in swords we hold. Today for the greatness of Hussein we rise, our bodies scattered with tomorrow's sunrise. For our murders, none of us will dare complain, and be killed 1,000 times, all for Hussein. We saw the work of Hussein as something unreal, and with our blood, his loneliness we would heal. Today the greatest companions will reveal, no tents will burn, and no women shall they steal. Today we'll crush Yazid's army beneath our heel, and we'll make his army to our Hussein kneel. Oh Yazid! Oh Yazid, today is the day of judgment, and you'll regret making our Hussein lament. Let us defend him here on Karbala's plains, and be killed 1,000 times, all for Hussein. لبيك أو صل فاطمة، لبيك يا أبا عبد الله، لبيك يا حسين. And now, please help me welcome Qari al-Aza, Brother Hassan Bazoon, after a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى آلك المظلومين صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا مظلوم يا شهيد كربلاء. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, as you are His vast mercy and the salvation of this ummah. Sallallahu alayka wa ala ashabika al-maqtulin dunak. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Ya Hussein, and upon your companions who remained with you and were killed in your defense in Karbala. مظلوم يا حسين غريب يا حسين شهيد يا حسين. Together we call his name. A stranger you were in Karbala, ya. Louder. A stranger you were in Karbala, ya. Thirsty you were in Karbala, ya. Martyred you fell in Karbala, ya. And the ziyarah that's attributed to our Imam al-Mahdi Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, the Imam sends his salutations upon the supporters and the companions of Imam Hussain. And he says, Assalamu alaikum ya khayra Ansarillah. Peace be upon you, O best of companions and victors. Peace be upon you for what you endured. And thus now reside in a lofty place. Yes, tonight we recall the companions of Imam Hussain alayhi salam who were killed with him in Karbala. In love they were. In love with Imam Hussain. In love they were, companions full of pride. In love they were, as they stayed by his side. In love they were, when they replied, we shall never leave your side. Hussein, Hussein, Hussein. Shall we burn? Shall we die? Shall we be ripped under the sky? From your camp we'll never depart, for your love is etched in our heart. Hussein, 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 Hussein. Yes, brothers and sisters, when the journey of Imam Hussain alayhi salam began in Medina, some people joined along with some of his family members. And then he went to Mecca, and some other people joined, some companions, some believers. And before Imam Hussain alayhi salam was getting ready to leave Mecca, he gave a sermon on the last day that he was there, and he said, من كان باذلا فينا مهجته موطنا على لقاء الله نفسه فليرحل معنا فإني راحل مصبحا إن شاء الله. Whomever is willing to spare his life for us. So he's being very transparent about what's going to happen. And he says in Mecca, whomever is willing to spare his life for us, and his heart has settled upon meeting Allah, then let him leave with us, for I am leaving in the morning. The Imam alayhi salam, in these words, he explains the heftiness and the value of this sacrifice, and the type of faith that one would need, and the type of conviction to be able to be ready to go with Imam Hussain alayhi salam to Karbala. And so as the trials continued, this became more and more manifest. And the vast majority of the Muslims that knew of Imam Hussein's endeavor failed him. They either betrayed him or they let him down. And only those with the purest of hearts and strongest of faith were able to stay by him. Many people said, we will join you, but only a few remained with him and actually stayed. And this is why the Imam alayhi salam is known to have said, فَإِنِّي لَا أَعْلَمُ أَصْحَابًا أَوْفَى وَلَا خَيْرًا مِنْ أَصْحَابِي. Indeed, in his ilm and his knowledge, the Imam says, I do not know of any companions or friends that are more loyal or better than my friends who were with me in Karbala. Brothers and sisters, Karbala is the story of those who are most faithful and those who persevered in their connection with Allah the most. So lend me your heart and travel with me to Karbala. Let's go with our heart and with our imagination to Karbala. To who? To Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Let's go to the last night. Let's imagine the scene. The last night before the 10th of Muharram. For 9 days, Imam Hussain and his family and companions had been besieged by an army of thousands in a scorching, barren desert. And for the last 2 days, they had been without water. The cover of the night had fallen, and in several short hours, the battle of Ashura will ensue. On one side, the large army sent by Yazid is celebrating, feasting, dancing, sharpening their swords and spears, preparing for the massacre that they will commit. But on the other side, what do we see and what do we hear with our hearts is a much smaller camp with heroes, but also women and children from the holy household. And within that camp, you can hear serene voices and murmurs. The voice of Imam Hussain, his family members and companions, immersed in prayers, in tasbih and recitation of the Holy Quran on their final night. And with their prayers, we hear the tasbih of the angels who will mourn Imam Hussain alayhi salam the next morning. In the heart of that night. Now what happened? Everybody knows what's gonna happen the day after. And this is the final night where they are together. What does Imam Hussain alayhi salam do when it's dark outside in the desert? Imam Hussain, he calls all of his companions. They surround him. Then he puts out all of the lanterns. So there's barely any light. It's very hard to see. Darkness covers the setting, and the Imam says, إن هذا الليل قد غشيكم فاتخذوه جملا. Ya ashabi, O companions, darkness has fallen and covered the desert. So flee. What's he telling them? He's telling them to leave. So flee under its cover, for these enemies only want me, and once they kill me, they will not chase after you. I'm setting you free. You don't have to uphold your bay'ah to me anymore. I'm setting you free of your commitment. When the ashab of Imam Hussain alayhi salam heard this from him, what did they say? They replied, and tears are rolling down their cheeks, Master Hussain, by Allah, we will never leave your side. What excuse can we give to your grandfather Muhammad on the day of judgment if we leave you now? لا طيب الله العيش بعدك يا حسين. Life without you, Ya Hussain, is bare of any meaning and is very unpleasing. Imam Hussain alayhi salam says, if you do not leave, indeed you will all be killed tomorrow. None of you will be spared. So they say we would be grateful for the honor and the blessing of being killed along your side. One of the companions who was with Imam Hussain alayhi salam, his name is Sa'id ibn Abdullah al-Hanafi. He says, Aba Abdullah, Wallah, shall I be killed tomorrow, then burned, then my ashes are thrown in the wind, then this happens to me 70 times, I will never leave you alone tomorrow. Another companion, his name is Burair, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, O grandson of Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us the blessing of fighting in your defense until our limbs are torn. For then your grandfather will intercede for us on the day of judgment. Then Zuhair ibn al-Qayn said, Wallahi wadattu anni qutiltu thumma nushirt thumma qutiltu ala hadhihi alf marra wa anna Allah yadfa'u bidhalika al-qatla an nafsik wa an ha'ula'i al-fitya. He says, Wallah, ya Habibi, ya Hussein, I wish that I would be killed, then brought back to life, then killed until I am killed 1,000 times. And with that, I would have spared you and your family from being butchered in Karbala. Then Muslim ibn Awsaja, one of the Imam's companions also, he says, how can we abandon you? How can we leave you here? Yani, what are you asking from us, Ya Hussein? We're in love with you. How can we leave you here? What excuse do we give Allah if we do not stand with you? Wallahi, I will not leave you until I dig my spear in the enemy's chest and I strike them with my sword so long as I can carry it. And if I stay without a weapon, I will fight you. I will fight with you by hurling stones at them until I am killed before you. Yes, some opinions say that night Imam Hussain alayhi salam was feeling abandoned and forsaken by this ummah, betrayed. They betrayed him and his grandfather Rasulullah. But our Imam is merciful, his heart is kind and tender, so he wanted to save his companions from the massacre and spare their lives. This is why he gave them that final chance to leave under the cover of night, to leave him alone. But when he saw that they refused to leave his side, it brought comfort and happiness to the heart of our Imam. And when he saw their determination, he says, look towards the sky. So they raised their gaze towards the sky, and Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he revealed to them what will be waiting for them in paradise. He revealed to them their lofty place in heaven. In the fading night were 70 nights surrounding Hussein to answer his plight. Habib and Zuhair, Muslim and John, these are some of their names. Abbas and Wahab, names never gone. He dimmed the flames, he said to them, go, flee in the night, spare your woe. They said with tears, dear beloved Hussein, we feel no fear, we're not afraid of pain. As long as we live, our life we'll give to shield your name, to shield your name. Shall we be killed? Shall we be maimed? What good is the world if you're not alive? Light these flames. Yani turn the lanterns back on, Abu Abdullah. No one is leaving anymore. Light these flames. Only with your love we thrive. He then stood feeling safe and revealed to that crowd their lofty place. Another narration says that night after this happened, Imam Hussain alayhi salam left the camp by himself. He went walking away. And so one of the companions who used to always watch over Imam Hussain, his name is Hilal ibn Nafi'. He saw the Imam walking away, so he grabs his sword and he hurries behind the Imam following him. Now the Imam hears someone is behind them. He turns around. He says, Hilal, is that you? Hilal says, Sayyidi Abu Abdullah, I fear for you being alone and far from us in this night. Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he looks at Hilal. He says, Ya Hilal, I came to see these hills. If the enemies can use them to ambush the tents and the women tomorrow. Then Imam Hussain, he grabs the hand of Hilal firmly. He says, Ala tasluk bayna hadayn al-jabal. Ya Hilal, why don't you ride now between these two hills and spare yourself from death? When Hilal hears this from Imam Hussain, he breaks down. He says, Sayyidi Abu Abdullah, my sword is better than 1,000 swords. I swear by Allah who has honored me with you, that I will not leave your side until I die fighting for you. Ya Hilal, ride from Karbala, flee. Ya Hilal, hide in these lands, leave me. Ya Hussein, Habibi, Hussein, I'd rather be killed. I'd rather tomorrow my blood is spilled than to leave you in Karbala alone. Yes, that night was very sorrowful, but Imam Hussain alayhi salam was still surrounded by his companions and family members. And he found comfort in their presence. But on the 10th day, when the battle began, the companions insisted that they would fight before Bani Hashim, before the family members of the Imam. In the first hours of the 10th day, there was an initial attack by the army of Yazid, and the battle raged for some time. Then the dust settled, and many of the companions were heavily wounded or martyred. And I'll tell you the story of one of the companions who was still barely alive was Muslim ibn Awsaja. So Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he's with Habib ibn Mudahir, and they find Muslim. Imam Hussain tells Muslim, may the mercy of Allah be upon you, ya Muslim. Then Habib says, your death weighs heavy on me, O Muslim. Be prepared for paradise. If I wasn't certain that I will soon be following you, I would have wished that you tell me which of your affairs you want me to take care of. So Muslim here, with his last breath, his last energy, he weakly points at Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and he says to Habib, my will to you is this man. Be sure to die defending him. Salamullah alayk, Abu Abdullah. Wahab al-Kalbi was another one of these companions. Wahab had met Imam Hussain alayhi salam along the way. And when he met him, he was with his mother and his newlywed wife. And Wahab and his mother and wife were Christians, but they became Muslims at the hand of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And they stayed with him in Karbala. They did not leave him. So when the battle started, Wahab was fighting. And after the first battle ended, Wahab came back. He came back to the camp. He wanted to speak to his mother. He says, "Mother, are you pleased with me?" She says, "I will not be pleased with you until you die defending Aba Abdullah." When his wife heard this, she says, "For the sake of Allah, Ya Wahab, don't leave me. We are newly married and I do not want to become a widow so soon." His mother tells him, "Do not listen for her and go fight for Hussein." So Wahab returns to the battlefield, and as he's approaching the battlefield, he hears a voice calling him from the back. He turns around, he sees his wife is running, but what's she saying? "Ya Wahab qatil dun at-tayyibin." Oh Wahab, fight for Hussein, fight for the noble ones, defend the household of Rasulullah. He says, "You're strange. You were urging me not to leave you, and now you're telling me to fight for Hussein." She says, "Ya Wahab, do not blame me. Inna wa'iyat al-Hussein kasarat qalbi." Ya Wahab, my heart was torn by the words of Imam Hussain. I overheard him saying, "How are we so alone? Is there no one else that will come to support us? Is there no victor that will help us?" And Ya Wahab, his words wounded my heart. "Sayyidi Aba Abdullah, we answer your call as your name lives in our hearts today. Labbaik Aba Abdullah, haka al-Nasir, haka al-Mu'in, wad-dam'u sa'il." A final story I'll tell you today. One of the companions who was with Imam Hussain alayhi salam, his name was Wadih al-Turki. And as he was fighting, he was attacked and he became wounded. Imam Hussain alayhi salam was able to get to him before he passed away. When the Imam found him wounded, he embraced him and he placed his cheek on his cheek. And the final words of Wadih al-Turki were, "No one is like me." And the grandson of Rasulullah has placed his face on my face. The companions of Imam Hussain all fought bravely, heroically, until they all died defending the Imam in the burning sands of Karbala. And after they were all killed, all the men from his companions and all the men from his family, the narration says that when the Imam remained without any fighters, imagine how much of a stranger he was that day when he remained without any fighters. He turned towards the battlefield, ready to enter, but he said, he called for them, "Ya Zuhair, Ya Burair, Ya Hilal, Ya Habib, Ya Ali al-Akbar, Ya Abbas, mali unadikum fala tujibun, وأدعوكم فلا تسمعون." Oh brave warriors, why do I call you but you do not answer me? Why do you not rise with me The women of the household of the Prophet are grieving over you. Awaken from your slumber, O noble ones, and defend the women of Rasulullah from these vile enemies. جاوبوني يا ليوث الغاضرية، جاوبوني بالعجان رحتم ندايا. Answer me, oh heroes of this land, answer me, for now alone I stand. Answer me, why have you lain in the sand? Answer me, who has severed who has severed my brother's hands? Sayyidi Aba Abdullah, none of your companions came, not because they deserted you, but because they were all killed before you. And this is how our master was killed in Karbala. Alone he was, when in Karbala he was killed. Alone he was, all his friends lay near him still. Alone he was, he called upon them to rise again, but silent remained the most noble of men. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, we ask you and call upon you by your greatest name, the mightiest, the most honorable. Send your blessings and praise upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and that you accept of us our worship. We ask you that you send your mercy upon the dead of the believing men and women. We ask you by Hussain, the martyr, and his mother and father, whoever in this gathering of ours and has a need, that you fulfill it for them, in particular those who have requested that we do dua on their behalf. We ask you, whoever in this gathering of ours is sick or has a sick loved one, that you heal them and cure their ailments. We pray that you relieve the suffering of all those oppressed, and that you hasten the return of our 12th Imam, and that you write our names amongst his supporters and aiders. We ask that you protect our scholars and Maraja, and protect the Muslim Ummah against evildoers. May the peace of Allah be upon the noble Hussain, the children of Hussain, the family of Hussain. May the peace of Allah be upon the companions of Hussain, and may the peace of Allah be upon the noble Abbas and the honorable Zainab. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على أبي الفضل العباس أخي الحسين. السلام على الحوراء زينب أخت الحسين. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح الشهداء والعلماء ومن مات على ولاية مولانا علي بن أبي طالب، وإلى أرواح من اجتمع في مجلسنا لا سيما القائمين على هذا المجلس. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة.
10 years ago, we embarked on a mission to revive the true values of Islam within our community. Empowered by the faith and dedication of our volunteers and your endless support, our projects impacted the lives of tens of thousands in our community and beyond. Since day one, our effort was recognized as one being led by the youth, and the youth have always been at the center of our focus. Our goal was and remains to instill Islamic values that enlighten the young generation, strengthen their identity, and empower them to become successful leaders in the future. But as the times we are in become more challenging every day, and our values are consistently under attack, we cannot stand still, and having a facility that allows for bigger and better projects became a necessity. Alhamdulillah, today, Taha Foundation, the parent organization of the Ashura project, and Al-Mustafa Scouts is pleased, honored, and excited to announce the next milestone in our journey. As of May 5th, we have completed the purchase of the upcoming Taha Foundation Community Center, a 48,000 square foot facility that has the amenities we need to improve and expand our programs, including a lecture hall, classrooms, a gym, and a spacious outdoor gathering area. While we are able to secure the purchase of this building, a lot of work is still required to transform it into the state-of-the-art facility that serves our needs in the most effective and efficient way possible. Today, more than ever, and for the sake of our kids and families, we're asking for your support in raising the funds needed for this project. Our fundraising target is $580,000 that will go towards renovations, repairs, furniture, and equipment. Your contribution, no matter how small, will make a significant difference. Join us as we embark on the next stage of our journey. With Allah's guidance and your support, we can empower the next generation of leaders and build a better future for our youth. Donate today.